Hi, everyone. We're Languid Hands, and we're joined here by Gail Lewis and Michael B Gillespie. And we decided to just start this conversation just with a bit of a clip of Abbey Lincoln singing triptych, prayer and protest. It was a little bit muffled, but if you didn't hear properly, then I suggest after this that you go back and watch that and listen to it. Yeah, so we're Languid Hands, and we are the current curatorial fellows at Qubit. And I guess we can introduce ourselves first.
Yes, let's do that.
Go first?
Okay, so we're an artistic and curatorial duo, and we curate the work primarily of Black artists and their collaborators. And we're very excited to be, working as curators at Qubit at the moment as part of our fellowship, and for our program, No Real Closure, which will see us curate 5 exhibitions with Black artists who we can go into a little bit later and share some resources so that you guys can see them. But basically, We are bad at introducing ourselves, and we kind of spoke a little bit about like whether or not we should introduce each other as individuals or a collective, but we have our own independent artistic practices, and then we have our collaborative practices. And Towards a Black Testimony Prayer Protest piece is actually the first sort of piece of work that we made together as Languid Hands. It was exhibited originally at and commissioned by Jerwood Arts for an exhibition called Collaborate last year in October. And since then, we've kind of used it as a curatorial concept. In fact, it was developed kind of as a kind of something that we could share with artists, thinkers, writers, the general public, the Black community in the UK and also elsewhere, to really kind of have some conversations around what it means for us to be testifying about kind of what it means to be Black and what our lives are as Black people, and to kind of try to fortify an understanding of testimony and the ability to testify or not, particularly in relation to kind of legal forums, but also just in relation to I guess sort of what it means to be continuously, generation after generation, talking about Black life, and that being kind of ineligible for various reasons. And so this was kind of, this film was kind of a space where we could, I guess, think about some of the things that we've been thinking, some of the ideas, some of the concepts, some of the questions to kind of throw out and then receive back, you know, feedback, criticism, conversations, other things we hadn't thought about, other ways of looking at the same kinds of things. And so we're really excited to be in this conversation with Gail Lewis and Michael B Gillespie, exactly for that reason, so that we can kind of talk about and around the film. And maybe you want to talk a little bit about kind of the film's structure, so that we can also explain why this is also a celebration of Abbey Lincoln and her life, her legacy. Today would have been her 90th birthday. And so, yeah, we're really excited and a bit nervous, so please bear with us.
Yeah, so the film is a bringing together of our two practices. I am a filmmaker, and Imani does kind of, I guess you could say, text-based performance work.
Yeah, performance, writing, and the space in between.
Yeah, so so I kind of annotated or illustrated the words that Imani brought together, and part of Imani's practice is bringing together lots of different voices in kind of this elongated performance, and that's what provides the voice for the film. And I kind of annotated it in the chapters that align with the three sections of Max Roach and Abbey Lincoln's triptych prayer protest piece, which you had a little bit of before, which comes from the album We Insist, Freedom Now Suite, which is an incredible jazz album that I think we all here on this conversation have a relationship with. And yeah, we wanted to kind of base it around that work, and the soundtrack is also a rethinking of that that piece of music, put together by Felix Taylor, who's a friend of ours, who put it together in a way that was just worked really well. Yeah, I don't know what else to say about it. I guess we're gonna delve a bit more into it in the conversation. But yeah, we wanted to celebrate Abbey Lincoln on her birthday, and this felt like a nice moment. We also, as we said, we made the film last year, and it had kind of, it felt very important to share it again in this moment, because for me, you know, the beginnings of this kind of resurgence of uprising was incredible to see, but it also provoked kind of a feeling of sadness because of the way that the legacy and the kind of ongoingness of this work is often erased and is often abstracted, and this film kind of feels like the way that we were thinking about these issues, the way we were thinking about Black lives, the way we were thinking about violence and death and grief, and
also abolition.
And it felt like the right time to share it again, and it's kind of exciting that we get to do it kind of internationally in a way with people from all over the world, because that's the intention that we have with the film. And yeah.
And also just to say that in the process of both making the film and also sharing it, it's been really exciting to find through archives, through suggestions, through conversations, other people who have also been trying to kind of create a thread between these ideas of kind of legality, of evidence, of testimony, of Black visual culture, and also a little bit of this, you know, part of the film speaks a little to dying declarations and this kind of, you know, idea of, I guess for us, we read it as a kind of the speculative nature of testifying as a Black person about your proximity and vulnerability to death, and really thinking about kind of what that means. And one of the, I'm just going to read a little passage that we found from a friend of ours, Ada Mboa, who wrote an article in 2013 called Abbey Lincoln Screaming Singing and the Sonic Liberatory Potential Thereafter. And I mean, you know, everybody should definitely read this, and we can make it available also. But I just wanted to read the final paragraph, which I guess also part of this is an experience of kind of time and temporality, and thinking about these ongoing conversations that happen between us right now and also our ancestors, and also in the future, and also just kind of making those connections across different mediums and across different contexts. So Ada speaks a little to this idea of the court of the real, right? Because the court, as we know it, is ill-equipped to deal with the reality and the kind of materiality of Black life. And so she says, in the court of the real, the recording serves, Abbey Lincoln's recording, serves as a public record of previously inaudible sounds and potential sights. The record seeks to make permanent narratives that are silenced by judicial courts and social spaces when they fail to redress slavery's legacy. To make a record is to make something seemingly ephemeral, such as sound, into a material object. The record is to inscribe, and Lincoln sounds trace violent, long, and loud cries into the soundscapes of the 1960s. A record is not only evidence of the past, but also in a court, say the court of the real, it is a testament to proceedings. Lincoln's screams testify. And, you know, it's so kind of interesting and wonderful to be having these conversations across time and across space, and really to kind of redress, I guess, some of those missed opportunities, because both of us are avid readers, avid researchers, and yet we still have to, you know, really do the work to find a kind of community of nerdy Black people who want to talk about testimony and testifying and object ontology and all of those things. And so that's nice in kind of a personal level, but also on a broader level, I think we would all here agree that it's really important to be having these conversations in this political moment to really move us beyond this idea that there is, you know, a justice that is redeemable within the contexts and the conditions that we have available to us. It's really in the film, you know, the essay and the kind of texts speak to this idea that the idea of the human, or the kind of category of the human, really is limited in its ability to really talk about Black life, and to, as Ada kind of references to really redress the legacies of slavery. And on that note, I think I'll see if there's anything else you want to say.
No.
Okay, so for anyone that doesn't know Gail or Michael, you have to get to know Gail and Michael. Michael Boyce Gillespie is a film professor at the City College of New York and the Graduate Center. His research focuses on Black visual and expressive culture, visual historiography, film theory, popular music, and contemporary art. He is the author of Film Blackness, American Cinema and the Idea of Black Film, and co-editor with Lisa Uden of Black One Shot, an online Black art criticism series on ASAP/J. His recent work has appeared in Black Light, a retrospective of international Black cinema, Flash Art, Unwatchable, and Film Quarterly. I'm going to introduce Gail also here. So Gail Lewis is a sociologist who specializes in psychosocial studies of race and gender. She is Reader Emerita of Psychosocial Studies in the Department of Psychosocial Studies, School of Social Sciences, History and Philosophy. Her political subjectivity was formed in the generative cauldron of Black feminist and anti-imperialist activism. She was a long-standing member of Brixton Black Women's Group and co-founder of the Organization for Women of African and Asian Descent, or OAD. She has been a member of the editorial collectives of the European Journal of Women's Studies and Feminist Review. I also just want to say in terms of kind of introductions that we also have chosen to have this conversation with Gail and Michael because we appreciate their work and appreciate them as people and appreciate the kind of generative natures of the conversations that we've already had with them as colleagues, as friends, as people within a kind of community of thought, of praxis. And so I think also just to kind of underline that when we invite people to have conversations with us about the film and about other things, it's really a kind of more holistic invitation than based on their kind of the things that they've done or the books that they've written or the people who they have, you know, been connected to. And so with that, Michael.
Okay. Thank you so very much for the invitation to speak on your work, which was a real pleasure, and I'm still processing it, and I look forward to processing it long beyond today, which I think is very much the point of the work. When you first contacted me and you had made mention of the We Insist recording, and I mentioned this to you yesterday, but I thought I would start here. When I really started feeling that it was time for me to just kind of drop into the jazz hole, which was in the mid 90s, there were two albums that I desperately wanted to have on CD. And those albums were, the first was Horace Tapscott's album Dark Tree, Volume 1, and the other was Max Roach's Freedom Suite of We Insist. And it took me several months to get the Max Roach, and it took me a few years to get the Horace Tapscott. But thankfully, through a Canadian importer via Japan, I was able to get the Max Roach. But now, of course, we have incredible access. So the novelty of that story for me, though, is that when I finally was able to listen to those two albums back to back, it did teach me a great deal about all of these kind of possibilities around what jazz collectivity sounds like, what it might look like in terms of thinking about jazz as a measure of collectivity and community, and therefore as some kind of instantiation of freedom dreams in all their forms. So, all right, I'll start. So an essayistic testimony on Blackness, legibility, joy, resistance, and the bloody tabulations and collusions of racial capitalism. Thank you so much for Towards a Black Testimony, Prayer, Protest, Peace. Its opening scene of Black mass gathering fractures the singularity of testimony with a building aesthetic proposition that is greater than pathologies, dissertations, or even white feelings. The piece thrives on this kind of asynchronous and incommensurate kind of practice, as there's an adjacency of the audio and the visual that deliberately, hesitantly, and vitally resists the kind of placation of dialectical rest. And as it's been described in terms of a measure of annotation between the audio and the visual, I also began to think of it as a kind of cross-medial and interdisciplinary duet. The piece is an invitation to be incited, a generative tableau to contemplate the diachronic streams of film form, history, and culture. For me, the piece is a very generous and important enactment of film blackness that defies a teleology of simply chapters and landmarks and plot points. Instead, it disobediently glides in the visual and expressive spaces of the Black radical tradition and the art of blackness. To me, to view it is to inhabit the words of Michelle Wright, as she has said, "There is no progress, there are only the infinite possibilities of the present." It is this kind of unfixing of linear causality of Black historiography of the writing of a Black history in strictly progressive terms that pushes for a kind of multi-dimensionality and a resultant measure of the global and temporal that is world making, that is Black making. It's tripling this, the triple.
Yes, sorry to disturb you. There's just some wind, I think, or something that is making a noise disturbance. So we can't hear you sometimes. Maybe it's just your paper on the...
It may be my paper. Let me check something.
Okay.
No worries.
Well, we'll take this opportunity then just to also say that Michael will present his response, and then we'll go to Gail, who will present hers, and then we will have a conversation between all of us, and we encourage you to ask questions in the comments or via questions@cubitartist.org.uk. We won't be able to answer all of the questions, but we'll answer as many as we can. Okay, Michael.
Okay, how's it sound? Okay, I think I might have actually been trying to stay too cool. All right. So there's a tripling scheme to the film, which is a structural nod to Triptych, the prayer protest piece from the 1960 album We Insist, Max Roach's Freedom Now score. The film is also an honoring of Abbey Lincoln, especially, whose vocals in the album are its grounding force. Yet this honoring does not suggest a measure of archival restoration. This honoring is manifestly the film itself, and it suggests not an idle nostalgia.
Sorry. We've still got the noise, Michael.
You still have the noise.
Yeah, I'm not sure where it's coming from.
I think it's the paper.
It's the paper?
Possibly.
All right, I've moved the paper.
Oh, okay.
I think that this, how does it sound now?
It sounds good. It just comes in every now and again.
Okay, all right. I've totally removed the paper.
We can still hear you.
I just won't have eye contact with you.
We don't want your testimony to be, ineligible.
No worries. All right. So I'm going to be over here, but I'm still here. Okay. So the honoring is manifestly the film itself, and it suggests not an idle nostalgia of reflecting on a missive from another age, but rather stipulates how Abbey Lincoln's song is still being sung. Her performance remains unfinished. In the first section of Prayer, Martyr, Dying Declarations, it riffs on the proposition of if I die in police custody. It is through these speculative declarations of premature autopsies, a Black prognostication that does not offer lottery numbers or other possible fortunes on the horizon. This is Black prognostication that contends that the only future that you see is your own death. This movement of the film demands that you remember that Claude McKay called them cowards and never apologized for the hope of one death blow. Moreover, with the March on Washington, the juxtaposition of the March on Washington and the Ferguson uprising, Between 1963, this juxtaposition of 1963 and 2014 are constitutively bound. Now more than ever in our pandemic insurrection days of today and tomorrow, I especially understand this moment in the film as a gesture to and through these histories, as the recognition of a matrix of eruptions in an unfinished and unfinalizable centuries-long process. It means understanding that before Staten Island, "I can't breathe" was probably the first phrase learned in the hold. In the next section of protest, mass, and ontology, again, we have this montage fury and this ceaseless chorus of one, a gathering of thresholds, promises, futurities. With this ring I thee wed is paralleled with voodoo practices and other vital practices, as they all become adjoining acts of devotion. Pagan love is real love. A pagan death is never death. Abbey Lincoln's scream vanquishes and marks the way, as does the stuttering flashes of the edits. In this shift to the third section of the film of peace, refusal, and testimony, I couldn't help but wonder about how many thieves cross your path every day that you willingly or unwillingly invite in. How many thieves take your dreams as precious stone, in essence not your own, a valueless preciousness that can only accrue by extractive means. I mean, you don't need your dreams, did you? It was a gift, right? Can you really go hungry without them? What do freedom dreams look like? What color are they? What do they taste like? The film has this very deeply contextual concern for thinking about form, but also thinking about futures. And in this way, it reminds me of what I desire out of the idea of Black film more generally, which is to understand it as a vital expanse of renderings and practices and critical traditions which are devoted to Blackness. In this way, at every day, at every hour, at every minute, I'm assailed by advertisers and their Black Lives Matter algorithms that claim to know me, that claim to give a shit about me, and that claim to love me. And I'm also reminded about Alice Walker's caution about these kinds of love. Never offer your heart to someone who eats hearts, who finds heart meat delicious but not rare, who sucks the juices drop by drop and bloody-chinned grins like a god. I love Black film, but I've never trusted it. Trust has never been and never should be the point. The kind of cine intimacies demonstrated by Towards a Black Testimony is a devising of channels of submission and revelation and passion. Yes, this is the kind of Black film I always want. This is the kind of Black film I always need. As I've written elsewhere, I've stated that the multi-discursive property of Blackness signals the capacity of the idea of Black film to function as an aesthetic, cultural, and political engineering of craft in myriad ways, or what I call film Blackness. There is no such thing as an essential Black film. There are only infinite variations and strategies. And of course, this puts critical stress on thinking about history alongside narrative, visuality, the experimental nature of Blackness, and cinema itself as in terms of its potential to be an enactment of Black visual and expressive culture. The idea of Black film will and must continue to prosper as an irreconcilable discourse that will continue to defy and challenge our sense of art history and culture. And the final section as well, I began to think as well of this incredible footage around Brixton and considering the ways that even in the midst of these kind of spirits or ghosts of insurrection, that we are also now addressing the ways in which this presence of the past remains, even as we have to address the gentrifying displacements of Brixton, Harlem, and possibly even Harper's Ferry. I just want to testify what your love has done for me. I just want to testify what your love has done for me. Thanks for your work.
Thank you so much, Michael, for that. I'm very honored.
Sorry about the papers. I'm just sorry.
That's totally fine.
Okay, all right.
I first of all, I would love you to send that to me, and also I wrote about your work during my master's, which was an awful experience because there wasn't anything speaking about Black film in the way that I wanted it to, and so I'm just really honored to hear that. So thank you very much.
I'm really honored you read the book. I kind of feel like I need to read it myself. Yeah, all right.
Thank you so much. So we're gonna go over to Gail Lewis, who's gonna offer her reflections, and then we'll have a conversation, all of us together. So we'll hand over to Gail.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, everyone. Michael, that was wonderful to listen to, really, and to engage the film again through your words, through your eyes, through your feelings, your heart. So that's beautiful. So now I want to watch it again rather than listen to myself. Thank you, Imani and Rabs, Languid Hands, for inviting me for this. This is quite an extraordinary thing for me, because, as I keep saying to you, I'm terribly nervous because film, what do I know about them? I can watch a film. I know how to watch a film, I think. We shall see. But I just feel really honored that you invited me to be in this conversation, really. And you know, it comes from other places, disciplinary places, but we all come together from a space of Blackness and a gesturing towards we. So thank you. So we shall see. Okay, so there are kind of sections in a way, but because I'm also a psychoanalytic psychotherapist, I wanted to start with my associations that were triggered by the film, and they're associations, so they don't line up. There's no coherence, but they're there. Association: Kelso Cochran, murdered by white men, May 1959, 2 miles from our house. David Oluwole, section, hounded by police for several years in Leeds, rough sleeper, body found in River Aire, May 1969. Mau Mau uprisings, 1952-1960. School busing, England style, Sir Edward Boyle, 1962. Bristol bus boycott, 1963. Cynthia Jarrett, 1985. Cherry Gross, 1985. Breonna Taylor, 2020, testify to each other, comparing notes on the death effects of police rampaging through their home. Sarah Reed, section, beaten by police, incarcerated, denied medical treatment, body found in cell, January 2016. We insist, freedom now, 1960. Notting Hill Carnival, 1959, enclosed, 1966, to the street. The Temptations, Just My Imagination, 1971. Matana Roberts, Libation for Mr. Brown, Bid 'em in, 2010, in the month before Abbey Lincoln passes. Rex Nettleford, Inward Reach, Outward Stretch, 1993. M. Norbezi Philip, Caribana, African Roots and Continuities, Race, Space and the Poetics of Moving, 1996. I'm 9 years old when Abbey Lincoln first inscribes into vinyl Prayer, Protest, Peace on the album We Insist, Freedom Now Suite, Max Roach. My associative reverie led me to confuse my age in an echo of the collapsed time that is the afterlife, as I located its moment of birth in the moment of my first really hearing it, later, around 1971, when I'm 20 and searching for my interiority through Eddie Kendrick's mellifluous falsetto on It Was Just My Imagination, and Nina Simone's declaration of righteous protest, remembering amidst tender vulnerability on the album Here Comes the Sun. Why these associations is yet to be discovered, and maybe our conversation now will shed some light on it all. Why this confusion of time? Or is it more precise to say collapse of time, as this gets us closer to what I already knew as a 9-year-old in West London, that Black life is precarious, that it's deemed without value as human life, and that to find a way to live, I needed to find a way to work inwards and outwards, a claim for an I that might meet the other I of I and I, and a gesture toward we in the making of Black feminist care and tenderness as an aspect of protest, as a gesture of prayer. And so I offer some brief comments of response. Repetition and dissonance. Can we have the clip maybe now?
Awa, it looks like I can't share my
But
screen,
you can maybe play it.
but let me see.
Just play it.
A bitter man, get a man, bitter
Can you hear it?
man. A bitter man, get a man, bitter man. A bitter man, get a man, bitter man. Yes. A bitter man, get a man, bitter man. The sun is hot and plenty bright. We're gonna get down to business and get home tonight. Auctioning slaves is a real high art. Bring that young gal, Roy, she's good for a start. Bitter man, get a man, bitter man. A bitter man, get a man, bitter man. A bitter man, get a man, bitter man. A bitter man, get a man, bitter man. Now here's a real good pie, only about 15.
Was that right?
That was the
Should-
first.
yeah.
And the second.
The second is the same track, people.
Yeah.
You can hang my mister. You can drown down my sister. You can beat up my grandma. You can kick down my grandpa. You can beat me. You can slice me the way you treat me. All you got to do is bid me in. All you got to do is bid me in. All you got to do is bid me in. All you got to bid me in. All you got, Mr. Bass. Oh, bum, 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 bum. Oh, yes. Bid me in. Bid me in. Mr. Drummer, bid me in. Bid me in. Bid me. All you got to do is bid.
You can cut it now.
Bid me in, bid me in. All you got to do.
Okay, thank you. So that's actually a 10-minute track. And I wanted to start there really because it seemed to me that this introduced a kind of apparently a structure of repetition of the Abbey Lincoln triptych that Roberts repeats, but with a difference. There is the repeat of the original Oscar Brown Jr.'s musical poem, Bid 'Em In. There is the shouts of the repeated rendering of Black life, Black women and men's bodies as cargo property, as out with the human in the violence of racial capital on the slave auction block. And then there's the capture and re-rendering without a once and for all severing of its provenance of the repetition of Bid 'Em In as it becomes a counting into the dum 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 and pulse and rhythm and aliveness of the blues in the face of the afterlife, of the social death of the Middle Passage and its scarring of the Americas. The words bid 'em in are still spoken, but the beat and finger snapping produce an oral register in dissonance with the words of the slave auction. This repeats for me what I saw in this as the structure of repetition and dissonance and possibility that the film Languid Hands have produced, that drives that film that they've produced. repetition of text from an array of speakers, familiar and less so, who offer ways to make intelligible Black life in the Black Atlantic, who voice the shape of our protest and claim. At the same time, the curation of these texts into this particular narrative form with this particular drive renders them more than a repetition. They become a representation for these times in a way that holds the here and now and the then and there simultaneously, a profound disruption or refusal of linear time, in an echo of Munoz perhaps, but certainly in the echo of Black life as lived. Visually, there's a repetition. Visually too, there's a repetition of footage, I would suspect less known, but who knows, that shows Black protests, Black bodies in movement, but not as cargo. It's also a representation that holds the here and now with the there and then, but it's in the contrast between the word and the image that the dissonance is announced and sustained. Think of the opening scenes with its text of Blackness outside the human, along with all the institutional architectures of materialization and knowledge production that produced that positioning as outside the human, around testimony. Think of all that at the beginning, the radical illegibility of Black testimony, in contrast with the visual images of Black women, Black queer bodies in onward motion, but not only motion, not a domesticated motility of walking, but a forward movement via whining and grinding. The dissonance is produced by the simultaneous demonstrations of the impossibility of Black life and the demonstration of the irrepressibility of Black life as Blackness, and more in a mode of generativity that evades capture by the constraints of heteronormative modes of reproduction. These are Black queered modes of motion. The cargo speaks, the cargo moves under its own generator. Its motility exists in refusal of the mobility of the ship and the hold and the prison. And as Nina Simone said in Who Knows Where the Time Goes on the Black Gold album, it goes on and on and on. And in that onwards, they create for us in that film a space of inhabitation in Blackness as life itself. Haunting. The other element in the triptych that is the film is the music itself. It's Abbey Lincoln's prayer protest piece. And in my hearing, how this was deployed in and by the hands and hearts and skills of Languid Hand was as a placeholder for the ambiguities of legibility, even while declaring the illegibility of Black life, even in protest refusal becoming. It acts as an expression of the scream of pain inflicted again and again to bring Nina into the frame of Abbey again in modes of capture. But it also introduces the space of the spiritual, the location of meeting and living with the ancestral. Watch and listen in protest, mass ontology. The text itself delivered to us in the beauty of voice proclaims the vitalness of anger, Black women's anger, as it tells us of Blackness as mass, whilst it also tells us of Blackness as mass, as subject to white practices of extraction, of the continued repetitive depletion of us. But the image tells us of another moment from another movement from a form of capture in marriage that segues into multiple forms of ceremony. And in these ceremonies, we meet the transformation of Black bodies out of the capture of gendered being into a queerness of human and non-human life. In the space of at the ancestral and spiritual connection, the scream of and in music transforms into a scream of ecstatic desire and holding, and a queer form of becoming, the insistent hum of fugitivity announcing the space of potential healing. And we come to rest with an insistence that we pick up our motility again in the Black screen voice of Malaysia Booker, talking to us after she has passed, a talking that in a way repeats what we have earlier heard from Martin, that death might be right there waiting, that we hear now, we hear now, but know that we could just as well be elsewhere, since other times we're at a memorial. Opening, and thus it opens into what Marquis Bay calls a generative disruption, opening into an otherwise realm of possibility, even as we mourn. Malaysia Booker calls forth all that haunts the houses of anti-blackness and gestures towards the irrepressibility of blackness lived then, now, future. We insist.
Gail, thank you so much. I mean, I don't know if we've like had like these kinds of reflections on this work, and it's just really wonderful to hear them and to hear that what we kind of intended, or I think what was intended through us, because I think during the making of the film, intent was a bit all over the place, but that has come through, and,
it was a
and
process.
all of the, I think, and I mean, to say that, you know, in the making of the film, and you can kind of hear it in both of your reflections, is real pain and difficulty. And the making of the film was painful and difficult. It took us a long time to work out how best to communicate these ideas, how best to think about this, and how best to show it. And in my work, I made a film critiquing the uses of images of violence, and so was trying to make this film without doing that, and speaking it rather than showing it. And I think that has come through in what you both said. It's really heartening to hear. To hear that.
I think also, you know, in all of the responses that we're getting, I think part of it is kind of to generate these discussions, and part of it also is to answer the question, you know, what did we make? Because, I mean, you know, as a maker of something, you have your own ideas of what you've put together and why, but then the ways that it's received and the kinds of responses and kind of resonances and the associations that you gave, Gail, were really amazing to hear. And I think we're both a little bit overwhelmed in terms of, you know, where next to go and what next to say. So I think, you know, this is the moment for us to kind of have a conversation about the film, about Abbey Lincoln, about our responses. And I wanted to just offer Michael a chance to respond a little bit to Gail, because Gail, you responded a small amount to Michael, and then vice versa. And then we can kind of pick up on some of the things that have really resonated for us also.
Thank you. Gail, that was fabulous. Thank you.
Thank you.
I mean, there's the opening gesture that you're making in terms of establishing a timeline, but it's not a timeline. It's almost like a rhizomatic kind of arrangement of where it's not like we're building, it's not a countdown per se. I just really appreciated the way that you kind of articulated for me what is a kind of calibration that's happening as I was viewing the film, of really watching the film and listening to the film and fighting that impulse of, say, classical cinema, of just like, all right, so what's this arc, and where's that where's that lovely happy ending, where's the resolution, where is the resolution on the horizon, right? And really, you spoke to me, what you spoke to for me was a kind of joy and embracing the kind of the feeling of suspension, of being held in place to bear witness and to listen, and then, you know, when we're finally kind of unfixed and the film is closed, then you know, that's where the real work begins. The real work begins once the film ends, and I think you spoke to that most especially. So thank you for that was incredible.
Oh, thank you. I mean, it's nerve-wracking, and I suppose I mean, like I was saying, it's like with these associations and all of these things that came up. And I guess partly it's trying to think about partly it's the context of being in Britain and particularly now.
Yeah.
So we have, you know, all the COVID stuff that's happening that is revealing without doubt just what a racial and racist formation this country is.
Right. This world.
But what bears down on us here, Michael, so much is the absolute refusal of, you know, dominant structures of intelligibility of this nation, you know, its goodness, you know, yes, there may have been this, but, you know, we stopped the slave trade and, you know, we let India free and, you know, all of this kind of stuff. And there is a way in which sort of almost fact after fact, death after death, worker after worker, scene after scene was showing this as a racial and racist formation. And still we were hearing the denials. You were getting fact checkers to really check whether the incidence of the number of black and of color people that were dying, a huge disproportionality, could be understood in terms of what they call black and minority ethnic BAME. That's what they call everybody, you know, or whether there was something to do with maybe their culture or the biology of their ethnicity. Right. And nothing to do with the racial structuring of employment, of housing, of residential segregation, of who's working where, at what times, who gets access to what, all of it. Right. And it was hitting them in the face. And there was such a profound sadness in me. I was thinking, look, I'm bloody 69 now I'm 69, but then it was, I'm going to be 69, but this can't keep happening. This cannot keep happening. Right. And although there are echoes from the response in the US, the refusal, the idea that the US is facing, you know, its primary problem, which is the race divide, as though it doesn't belong here. So there was something about that, you know, this time now. And then there's also something about the ways in which in this moment, in the sort of 80s and 90s, there was the way in which the Black Arts movement offered us a way to be. Right. In all sorts of complex and contradictory ways to be that opened up, that made it more capacious to be Black in Britain. You know, there's no doubt about it. And there was some of that was that it was more capacious to be Black and woman in Britain because of what was going on. But now it feels to me we're in another moment, and this film is testimony to it, that we're in another moment of making it possible to be Black in Britain, but now it's queered in a way. And I mean, I don't just mean queered through a kind of some register of sexuality. I mean queered in the sense of the ambiguity, the unknowingness, the uncertainness, the moving into, the invitation and potential to move into a way of being that has not been offered. And yet even while we're dying because of COVID. Yeah. For example, and at police hands and all the ways of incarceration. So we've had these two videos revealed of police stopping. One was a Black woman who was a nurse. She was on her way home. This is like two years ago, I think. She stopped, and it absolutely can happen in the US. They stop her, they say, you know, your light was out or some nonsense. And they say, get out the car. And she says, no, I'm frightened. And you can see this woman's terror. She's terrified. But here's the Britishness of it. The police guy says, madam, you're talking to the police, as though she is completely out of her mind to be frightened of him in his authority. And so there's something about that, you know, that's opened up now. But we have with us now these resources of Black cultural production that are saying we don't need to just understand this through some kind of sociology or feminist sociology or any of those things. We can now understand it through the unfinished testimonies and potentialities that's produced through all this cultural production work. So that, in a sense, that all of that is behind my response to this. In other words, an old woman sees a young people's film.
Not at all.
I think
You should just let the critics say that.
Yeah.
You should not say that yourself.
Okay.
So,
I just found it wonderful, and yeah.
I think also that what you're speaking to, and what we tried to do with the footage as well, was to address multiple contexts.
Yeah.
And so the first one is in San Martin, which firstly is not a Caribbean country that immediately comes to mind for the average British person or even person in America, of Carnival, and that's interspersed with London, and then it goes to the US, it goes to the Marsh and Washington and to Ferguson, and then all of these different registers that and Fred Hampton in the film, his words are invoked, and he says, he talks about the international proletariat revolutionary struggle, and that's something that that I think was also a part of the frustration that I was feeling when people were marching in London, was this inability to reckon with our own context, and only an ability, like all that we can do is respond to another context because it's over there and it's clear to us.
But that's also required of us by, we go on, have a conversation on the news, and we use media, and the first question is always, talking, this is an American problem, but does this really happen in the US, in the UK, or is it as bad as the US? And so really trying to kind of foment a language, but also a politics that allows us to say, well, actually, it's happening in both places, and in all places. Therefore, in all places, there needs to be this kind of resistance. And I think, I think that at various times and in various places, our ability to respond or think Blackness has been queered already, right? That's not new in this moment, but there is something specific about this moment that kind of we've been having conversations about, that as far as it goes in my lifetime, I feel like a politics of abolition, a politics that kind of rejects or refuses this kind of category of the human as the kind of ultimate panacea for racial justice, like treat us like human beings, that kind of rhetoric, that kind of like include us in your project rhetoric. All of this has been happening, and this is maybe the first time that it's really felt possible to have a kind of intergenerational and international conversation about Black life, in which I can see your experiences and you can see mine as, similar and different, as part of the same kind of white supremacist project, part of the same, therefore, struggle for freedom and for liberation. And not only amongst Black people in different contexts, but also then too, there is no place where there is not a kind of carceral logic embedded and normalized in our understanding of what it means to be human, and what it means to be in community, to be a society. And so really thinking about the potential, the really very real potential of actually a clear line of solidarity between here and every other Black person, between here and every person who is struggling against, police brutality, against surveillance, prisons. And so thinking really, actually this kind of proliferation of abolitionist thought and study and activism that seems so possible now, feels like the only thing that I guess has grounded me. And it also allows me not to have to kind of make smaller or less relevant or erase any part of myself, because it's every part of myself that is at risk because of these carceral logics. And so, I don't have to say, I can be in solidarity with you around, resisting carceral logics, kind of transforming our society so that we can actually achieve some sort of justice. And I can do that and be as Black and as gay and as woman as I like, or as, you know, gender, whatever as I like. And that's not a kind of, that doesn't come to it as a type of identity. It comes to conversation as a type of difference. And that I felt has been, you know, that's why I think also we've wanted to have this conversation now, because in watching the film, and, you know, I feel like I can say very, very openly, not just because it's Leo season, how much I love this film. Also because,
I think that might have a little to do with it.
Yeah.
You know, I love watching this film in part because of what you enabled with your annotations, right? It was a collaborative process, but it was also in a lot of ways a very sort of separate process.
Yeah.
And part of it was because, you know, I was like, well, you do the images first, and then I'll say what I want to say around the images, or I'll do the script. But you were very insistent that I, you know, create a kind of narrative that you could annotate visually.
Did you give each other? I mean, so
yeah, what's the process?
Did you give each other kind of like a list of like editorial comments on the text and the visuals? I mean, did you have to kind of work together to meet each other with the image and the text in that way?
Yeah, it was difficult because firstly, in terms of finding archive footage that was like Creative Commons or usable, or even that I had was difficult. It was very difficult to find specific things to do with Black people. You would find like Black women eating an apple, like, or like and you would find the most obvious footage that's used there, which is of the March on Washington, but it's actually very difficult to find those things. So really all of it came together very last minute, in the sense that like I had found some stuff and downloaded it. Imani had pulled together some stuff, and we were like, okay. And the decision to make it prayer protest piece, the chapter was a late one actually. And it worked out very well, because it meant that I was like, okay, I'm doing it this way, and I'm gonna mess with our perceived definitions of what those mean. And I think both of you kind of spoke to that in your responses. Let's play with what, you know, what we think of as protest. Let's think about it as a prayer. What we think of as peace, let's think about it as the only thing that will get us actual peace, which is insurrection, which is fighting, which is violence, or as they would call violence, but that I would call an uprising. And trying to break it down into these kind of different parts. And it was difficult. We fought. You know, it's hard to make work about death in this way. Make work about the very thing that creates the life that we aren't able to live. And I think this thing of humanity, and I think about that a lot alongside abolition. I've been thinking recently, like, what is the point of being human? What is our goal when we ask for humanity? Why do we want to be human in the way that they consider us human or not? What is the use of that? And now I'm getting more well versed in abolition. I declared myself an abolitionist maybe a year or two ago.
It was a great moment.
After having between us. But
are there Hallmark cards for that?
An anniversary.
Congratulations.
But thinking about abolition and also thinking about like the human and what that means.
I think also, you know, we had already been thinking and unpacking the human because of Sylvia Wynter, because of Saidiya Hartman, because of our interest in, you know, in Black study generally, which is always already kind of questioning our, as Black people, our kind of, I guess, legibility as subjects, right? And so also, you know, the text and the essay came in part from just finding little bits of text here and there through my own research, and also through thinking, okay, so if we are seriously able to look at this kind of idea of the subject and say, well, this this is not, you know, for us or by us or about us, then what does it mean to think through like legal forums where everything is all about human rights, everything is all about the subject, and particularly around testimony. You know, I did a master's in forensic architecture, and within that, you know, these ideas of testimony are about understanding that the subject is able to testify in a court of law, but also kind of experimenting with and thinking through the ability or what it would mean to interpret an object through the legal forum. And so what does it mean to think about an object testifying? And forensic architecture has, you know, done work on that, but it's all kind of within this framework of human rights. And so this film also comes out of this questioning of like, well, where are we able to testify? Are we able to testify? We are not subjects, we're not fully objects. You know, a lot of much Black study has been thinking around, you know, objecthood, and you know, Fred Moten especially was somebody who I was reading as I was kind of gathering these texts. And also, you know, if we are going to testify, I'm not going to do that in a court of law, because that has never and will never work for me. And I know that as an abolitionist, also just from being, you know, from paying attention.
No, I mean, it's really impressive and inspiring to watch the film and understand that I'm watching a process that is deeply invested and not being recuperated by these measures around common ground or a general measure of humanity. And that's why it's so poignant of when you get to the peace section. Well, you know, yes, the song is the structural conceit of the film, but the film amends that third, amends the trilogy to end yet again, as I said, on this space that can't be fundamentally recuperated in terms of, I mean, it's refusal and testimony. And that's just a really brilliant, it's a brilliant aesthetic and political gesture with which the film closes, particularly when we cut to black and we continue to hear that. Yeah, and I totally, I mean, there are some moments, you know, particularly whether you're in the street or you're in the academy, there are moments when the minute you open your mouth, you're already admitting defeat in a lot of ways. When it's like, I didn't need to be here at all, because your place in these particular sites has already been so prescribed, and you find yourself just suddenly gliding into what you thought of was a radical position, but was really the only space that was provided for you. You know?
Yeah, I think also, and one thing I wrote down when you were speaking, Michael, and I think that you also spoke to this, Gail, when you spoke about Malaysia, was, I mean, for me, for Amani, the kind of impetus behind this film came from a frustration with forensic architecture and the framework of that. And for me, I tend to walk around the world thinking about the multiple ways in which I could die at any moment. And I think that is not uncommon for Black people. And I was really interested in, and this is thread throughout the film as well, in these dying declarations, these testimonies just before their deaths, who are saying, I am going to die and this is how I'm going to die. And in the film, it's Fred Hampton, it's Malaysia Booker, and Martin Luther King, and I think there's some others dotted in there as well.
There's also sections from, I'm
forgetting his name as well.
Yeah,
I know who you mean.
His name, but a poem written by a young boy at school, who later was killed, and so thinking, you know, not like, you know, obviously a kind of political leader or liberation leader talking about the possibility of their dying is understandable in a kind of way of, well, you're a leader, so you're talking about the kind of risks, you understand the danger you're putting yourself in and the specific danger you're putting yourself in. But I think what the film does, and also like through this use of images also speaks to, you know, Saidiya Hartman's kind of framing of this mundanity of Black life that is not about the spectacular, right? Which is not about, you know, and even with the March on Washington, you moved the camera to not necessarily make it clear that that's the march that you're talking about, to kind of turn the camera to a face that is recognizable or not recognizable. And I think also with the text, because some of the work is mine, some of the work is words that you definitely will have heard, some of the words or that many people have heard. And so kind of this flitting in between recognition and non-recognition. And so what that does to your listening and to your ability to find that common ground, but also to kind of recognize that all Black people matter, right? And so all of those people have that shared experience with you, which is not always, you know, I think also a lot of the times when there's uprisings, like especially the two Black Lives Matter kind of peaks in organizing, or at least in like public paying attention, is that it's this kind of like, you know, actually, no, I'm not afraid, you know, I'm not only afraid of being killed by the police. There are several other ways in which I know I will die. And in fact, whichever way I die, there is a tether back to my Blackness.
Yeah, and when you say that in the film, you know, we will die because we are Black. And I think that COVID is one of these things that really puts that into sharp relief, is that, you know, that people talk about it, have like, you know, use the word like the great leveler, or like, you know, we're all at will of this disease. But that really shows, you know, it's the conditions of our lives that mean we're vulnerable to these things, whether it's COVID, whether it's dying at the hands of the police, whether it's, you know,
this lack of recognition.
Yeah, and that, I think, was where I was coming from with it, was thinking about how we know this, even if we don't think we know it. Yeah.
And then also, what does it mean to have that knowledge?
Exactly.
What do we do with that?
Yeah.
We are, I just wanted to remind everyone who's watching that you can send some questions through the comments. We don't have loads of time, but we'll just keep speaking, and then if you send some questions, we'll try and answer them as well.
Sorry, go ahead, Michael.
No, you go, Nick. Yeah.
No, I was thinking that's all of that's right, but I kind of want to, I feel like I want to rescue a thing that I think comes from the film too, which is in the spaces of dissonance, is the space in which we travel and live Blackness anyway. Right. And it's not because it's in that space that we're not looking towards some kind of state or some kind of idea of what the human is, that in that moment, in those spaces, none of that matter. We're not interested in who's human, who isn't. You know, we're not making a claim for citizenship against the state. I mean, sometimes we are, like access to healthcare, you know, say, for example, but in the spaces of Black life as lived anyway, as well as otherwise, but anyway, I think that that's the space of potentiality that the film signals. And it's a potentiality that is lived actually, you know, we actually do it, but it's always a potential to live. And it's what I was trying to get at when I was saying in the scream, you can hear, there's one part in the film, it might be in part 2, where the sound, it goes to an insistent, like a hum. And it's penetrating in a way, but it insists on keeping on, and know who is walking with you is all the things that you no longer know that you know, but you do, because it's ancestral knowledge and it's with you. And it's in the space of what I'm calling in this, the ancestral spiritual, because we are here. There's something that we keep on going. And we keep on going in a way that isn't just in the image of making claim against the state. We do that, we absolutely do that. But we don't, that isn't the sum all of what we do. We also live for ourselves, like you know, the other day, like going to carnival. Exactly. And exactly. And the Norbezi Philip piece that I refer to, called Caravana, is all about going to carnival from times of plantation, you know, and everything, and doing carnival anyway, and all the attempts to close it down and to prevent movement, all the ways in which to legislate against movement. But the bodies keep on moving. There is the capacity to animate oneself, like physically in a motility, but also to animate ourselves as Black people living Blackness. Yeah. And I think I think the film, it's in the disjunctions in the film, in the dissonances, in the, we're hearing this in this on one register, but we're hearing that on another register. And then there's that third one, that hum of the music, or the scream that's multivalent. It is a scream of pain, and it's more than that. Yeah. So I think that I kind of want to hold on to that aspect of the film too.
Yeah, there's quotidian survival that is evident. I mean, I'm particularly thinking of the I guess that's home movie footage of someone's wedding that you have turned throughout. I mean, that to me is quite it's a deeply poignant moment for me, that in spite of the context of what is being told in over the audio, we have, again, this is everyday people are getting married. In spite of this, that people will continue to get married. And again, as I just said, I mean, I'm just so grateful that it didn't open with, say, a funeral. You know, it had to open with a carnival, because we have to have a moment of reminding us, you know, that Blackness is not equatable strictly, exclusively in the terms of anti-Blackness. There are other manifestations, absolutely, other pleasures to be derived from Blackness. And while this is a very critically minded film, that it's not a film that's blind to what is a larger range of thinking about Blackness, you know.
Yeah, definitely.
Which is its power.
Yeah.
That was definitely an intention, and I think so that footage, also to say that is from Sam the Wheels' archive, and Sam the Wheels is an archivist and bike repairman from Brixton. He lives on Brelton Road, and he has been archiving and taking video in and around Brixton since the 60s. And his work I've used in quite a lot of my films, because it's, first of all, some of it's Creative Commons, but also just that very thing, that every day, that kind of footage that you often don't see, that you want to see, that you know of because you've been in that wedding, or you know, I when I saw that wedding, there's like these two flower girls, and they remind me of my mum and her sister in an image. You know, it's like that's what it brings, and especially I think at that point you're speaking the words of Audre Lorde, and you're talking about anger and Black women, and it felt right, because you have all of these smiling faces, but and those things exist at the same time. Two things can be true at the same time, and
also I think, you know, they're only possible with each other.
Yeah,
you know, we're able to do carnival because of our anger, right? Because of our refusal, because of also the existence of a kind of recognition, a kind of collective power in the fact that whilst we're not subjects or objects, we still are. And you know, and then that's kind of expressed, and that is allowed because of all the other things. There are some questions.
Yes, there are. We have two laptops up.
I just wanted to say something real quick. Thanks so much for that information about the footage. because it reminds me a lot of the great work that's being done at the Black Smithsonian here of the restoration of Black home movies, and the kind of work that you see, that's it's just incredibly precious. So thank you for that info.
So one question from the wonderful Martina, aka Judah Attil, who's watching. Just to let she says, death lives a human life, lying in the grave with time to think. These concepts in the work are very evocative. Do Michael or Gail have a response to these propositions? So you can see them in the chat here.
Oh, I see it now.
Yes.
Death that lives a human life. You know, it immediately makes me think about, you know, in this current moment, the overwhelming kind of recognition of, you know, my Black friend might be feeling things that I'll never feel, right? And the kind of conversations or the kind of random notes that might be that have been sent to us in the last few months, perhaps. And it, to me, I mean, the statement kind of speaks to, I think, what we were just kind of speaking to, that, you know, to be Black in this world is a very demanding kind of multitasking that not all can do, and that many have the privilege of not having to do it, right? So it is very much about this kind of liminal threshold, kind of quotidian everyday, right? My proximity to life and death is something that I neither take for granted, nor do I often is it something that I necessarily embrace. It's just always with me, to the point that to try to speak on it is sometimes so complicated of an affair. But I mean, that again is a part, I think, also speaks to the kind of thread of suspension that runs throughout the film of can you hold this, can you be held in this kind of liminal place to be able to process so much that in many ways operates in complementarity rather than in a juxtaposition of opposites. Yeah.
Gail, did you have any thoughts on that?
Not thoughts that I can articulate. Thoughts going on.
That section, just for everyone, is from a book actually by, I think, a white man who put together a collection called Black Testimony. I think it's Thomas Whitton. And so he put together kind of, you know, Black testimonies of Caribbean people.
Oh yeah,
but of sort of voices. It's called Black Testimony: Voices of Britain's West Indians. And so really thinking about, you know, trying to find, you know, in my research, thinking like, you know, who else has written about Black testimony, what, you know, and thinking about, you know, where it comes and where it doesn't, and what kind of definitions of testimony. But so in this book, there are lots of different, testimonies of what people's life is like, kind of an ethnography of Britain's West Indians. And one of them is, a few of them are of children. And so that whole section, you know, talking about this child and their mother, and talking about aging and death and like, you know, conversation, you know, and thinking exactly like you said about you thinking about how or when or why or what will happen when you die, and thinking about actually when was the first time I thought I could die, and I could die and it will have something to do with my Blackness, but also before that, just being aware that people die and people and that there's not always a reason. And so, and the first time, you know, that happens is when you are a child, like, and thinking about the children who are in the visuals, and also the children who are growing up now and seeing people talk about death all the time. And it's not something that is kind of, you know, the idea that it's natural doesn't really make sense. And so what are these kind of curious questions that children are asking about, you know, what happens when you die, and what is our relationship to death as Black people when we're thinking about our, you know, living relationships with ancestors, and thinking about, yeah, just, and so but for clarity, that section is the words of a child in this book, Black Testimony, Voices of Britain's West Indians.
Yes. And so another question from Ifeanyi Awache. Hi, great to see you. You're tuned in. Could you say more about the distinction between identity and difference, Imani? You said earlier about your Blackness, your gayness could not just be just an identity, but difference.
Well, I mean, I don't know if we should stay too much on this part, but I'll just pretend I didn't say that. Okay, so so I was thinking that, you know, what identity has done for me is meant, okay, great, let me find, like, in my short life, right, and also in my political life, in terms of organizing, in terms of like understanding and becoming political, identity has allowed me to see sameness, and to try to find a safety in that, to try to find an articulation about who I am. And that's a very important and also very personal, of course political, but personal journey of figuring out how I identify, who I am. And that's different than understanding difference in a political kind of, in the sense of trying to find a common solidarity where we can work together to bring about our liberation. And so, you know, I understand sameness. Sameness gets me so far. Yes, you know, the Black queer community has saved my life, but it has also not liberated me. And it's not the job of people who with you know, shared identities with me to kind of liberate me. And actually, what is more useful, I have found, in terms of thinking towards liberation, is understanding where the differences are and celebrating them. Understanding that if I'm going to have a conversation with somebody who is in the Philippines, who is experiencing, you know, who is not Black, who is not queer, but who is experiencing, you know, egregious violence at the hands of the state, there are ways that we have to be in solidarity. I have to know that my struggle is intimately connected through their struggle, right? And that together we can bring about a kind of liberation. But that's not going to happen because we have a shared identity. It's going to happen because we understand our differences and we're able to see where things are similar beyond our identity, right? And so thinking about this distinction has been really helpful, because often also, like, as a queer person, I don't really know what my identity is. There are all these labels, there are all these things, there are all these frameworks. Some of them resonate for a while, some of them don't. You know, people ask me my pronouns, they are in and flux. But what I do know is that, you know, together at some point, we have to find a way to be in solidarity and to recognize and celebrate the differences and the power that difference has, rather than the power that I have in my own identity, right? That's for me and everyone who has that shared identity to celebrate, because it's important to celebrate ourselves. But in terms of thinking strategically, I don't need you to understand my Blackness. I need you to understand that your struggles against the police, against extrajudicial killings, are absolutely central to my understanding of what my struggle is. And through our communication, through our recognition of that difference, then we can kind of move towards a more liberatory place.
I think if you had a mic, you would drop it. But so it's now 1:30, and I wanted to just allow some space for just some final reflections before we finish, which a conversation that I feel like could go on exponentially. Gail and Michael, if you have any more thoughts, I would love to hear them. One thing that I wanted to kind of pull up, like that I wrote down in my notes, I'm just gonna like spew a couple of things. One of them was, Michael, when you talked about heart meat, I mean, and also when you said
it's all Alice Walker.
Amazing. And when you said that you never trusted Black film, that's also something that really resonates with me, and that's really at the heart of what I try to do. And Gail, when you talked about haunting and ecstatic desire in conjunction with each other, like in opposition and in relationship to each other, those two things were just excellent. So I was just like picking up on some bits for some closing remarks.
I think there's no...
Do you want to say something first?
I can, I guess. What's in my mind at the moment is it's partly connected to the ecstatic desire, and partly connected, sort of bouncing out of what Imani's just said about the distinction, and the important distinction as a place of practice, if you like, between identity and difference. And I want to kind of just, what's around for me profoundly is the thing that comes from ancestral knowledge, and the thing that is not able to be known in discourses of the human and discourses of the citizen, and all of that, is that everything is connected. Everything is connected. The virus shows us that the thing that makes us unable to breathe allowed us to breathe because of less pollution. Everything is connected. And that when the political struggle, it seems to me, and I would say the psychic struggle, is how to both occupy our separateness in a way that doesn't constantly produce claims of superiority or wanting access to superiority and hierarchies of difference and value. And on the other hand, knowing that if the figure that you conjure, Imani, in the Philippines is not met by me in a gesture of we are connected, ancestral spirit knows we're connected, shows us it can be, which is in the film a bit, the transformation of human body into non-human body as a process of becoming. That's the challenge, is how do we take that we know and we can get, and is all around us in expressions of Black life in the Bronx or in Brixton, that kind of stuff. How do we get that and fold it into a politics that says ultimately, urgently, what we need to do is know it's difference that we need to engage, not similarity, not sameness. Right. And I think it's that resource. And that's why I keep going on about the space of the dissonance. Into that can flow all these other urgent demands that are not about claims to human, if that's what human means, and all that kind of stuff, but modes of living personhoods in connection. The I and I. Right. Rasta, no, the I and I. Right. So that's all I want to say. And but to say again, thank you so much for inviting me into this conversation. Much to ponder, and I really feel honored. Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
So I think for future reference, I should never go after Gail. That's a note to self. Thank you for all the wonderfulness you just shared. So I remember when I was thinking about, you know, why do I know why I like the work so much, and I like it because it is irreconcilable, and that to me is what remains important about thinking about not only liberation and political struggle, but for what is the place and potential work of a Black cinema today. And to me, it can't be patronizing. It cannot be human driven in the sense that there is some kind of agreed upon aspirational horizon. And it has to be willing to fuck with you in the most vital ways possible. And thank you for that, because
Yes.
this is what stays with us, you know? The help does not stay with us. Green Mile does not stay with us. It is this work that you're doing that stays with us, and that we have to constantly keep returning to. And that's the work of living, that's the work of study, and that is the real work of struggle. So thank you.
Beautiful.
Thank you so much for that. Yeah, I'm gonna like email you because I mean I think that your thought probably informed all of my thought, but it's like it's that's, you know, the biggest thing. I'm so honored to have both of your reflections on this work.
I want to become a filmmaker. I want to start again. Sorry.
The cinema of Gail Lewis, I'm here. Thank you both so much, and thank you everyone who's engaged. It's really great to have this conversation, and I hope that people continue to engage. So
we'll be at Qubit until 2022.
Well, no,
2021, the end of 2021. And there are 5 exhibitions that we will be curating with wonderful artists, and they are, should we talk about them? So actually the first exhibition that's opening is opening on the 3rd of September to the public, and it's R.I.P. Jermaine, and their exhibition is called Dead Yard, and you can find more about that on Qubit's website. And then we also have exhibitions from Shanice Oritha, Ajamu X, Zinzi Minot, and also Ray Kamara, or Kamara Taylor. They have several names. And we're very, very excited to be working with those artists, and also to be working with various Black curators across the UK through a network that we set up called Curatorial Tactics. You will be hearing more from us. We do sleep. We also work a lot. And so, but don't worry about us. We're going to be okay. We're going to be well rested and nourished.
And how long is the film up? The film is up until Saturday?
It's up until Sunday, 6 a.m.
Sunday.
tea time. But
I mean, really, no one's going to be up at 6 a.m.
Yeah, we're just going to be at Sunday UK time. Before we go to bed, maybe a bit more than 90 hours.
Okay.
So yes, if anyone has seen the film, please do watch it. And we're always open to having conversations. Like, put things in the comments of the Vimeo. Like,
get in touch with us.
Yes. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
All right.
Thank you. Nice to meet you, Michael. Thank you.
See you. Keep enjoying the sea.
Yeah. Bye, everyone.
All right.
Bye.
Bye.